I'm Captain Susan Chesterfield, 29, an Air Force pilot who earned her silver wings the hard way, through grit, sleepless nights, and more than a few crash landing grades before I learned how to rise. For years, I chased one thing: my father's respect. I built my career around proving I was worthy of his salute. But when he called me a disgrace to the family right before his own commanding officer saluted me, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been written off by someone you spent your life trying to make proud? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I explain what happened that night, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, courage, and quiet revenge. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up watching my father salute. Not the casual wave some officers give each other in passing, but the crisp, regulation salute, fingers aligned, hand angled just right, eyes forward. Colonel Robert Chesterfield never did anything halfway, especially when it came to his Army career. By the time I was 8, I could recite the chain of command better than most privates. By 12, I knew the difference between dress blues and service uniforms. By 16, I understood that in our house, respect wasn't given freely. It was earned through rank, discipline, and unwavering conformity to military standards. My mother existed in the spaces between his expectations. She smiled when he spoke, nodded when he made decisions, and quietly encouraged me when he wasn't looking. I remember her tucking notes into my lunchbox during high school. "You're doing great, sweetheart." She never said these things at the dinner table. That was his domain, where conversations revolved around military strategy, current deployments, and which officers were moving up or washing out. I learned early that to matter in his world, you needed to wear the uniform and wear it right. I announced my intention to join the Air Force during my junior year of college. We were having dinner, pot roast, his favorite, and I'd rehearsed the words for weeks. "I've been accepted to officer training school," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I start after graduation." He set down his fork with deliberate precision. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then he said, "The Air Force." The way he emphasized it made it sound like I'd said I was joining the circus. My mother touched his arm gently. He shook his head. "You'll never last flight school. It's not about wanting it. It's about having what it takes." I graduated with honors and reported to OTS at Maxwell Air Force Base 3 weeks later. The training was exactly as brutal as promised, long days that started at 0500 hours, physical conditioning that left me wondering if my legs would ever stop shaking, and academic pressure that made college feel like a vacation. But every time I wanted to quit, I pictured my father's face across that dinner table. Every time an instructor got in my face, I heard his voice saying I didn't have what it took. I finished in the top 15% of my class. Undergraduate pilot training came next. 14 months of the most challenging flying I'd ever done, starting with basic propeller aircraft and progressing to jets. I soloed early, earned high marks in formation flying, and managed to land a coveted fighter track assignment. The day I received my silver wings, standing on that stage in my service dress uniform with my class around me, I scanned the audience for my father's face. He wasn't there. My mother attended alone, beaming despite the empty seat beside her. Later, she explained that Dad had paperwork that couldn't wait. Important colonel things. I nodded and smiled for photos. I mailed him a picture anyway, me in blues, wings pinned above my ribbons, silver bars gleaming on my shoulders. I included a short note. "Thought you'd want to see this. Love, Susan." 2 weeks passed. Then 3. I checked my mailbox obsessively, though I tried to convince myself I didn't care. The response finally came on a Tuesday, a form letter, the kind the Army sends families during deployments, with a handwritten line at the bottom. "Congratulations on your commission. Dad." Not "Love, Dad." Not "Proud of you." Just his title, like I was another subordinate in his command. My first operational assignment took me to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. I flew F-16s, logging hours in combat training exercises and learning to push myself and the aircraft to the edge of capability. The desert heat was relentless, but I loved the work. There's something clarifying about being alone in a cockpit at 20,000 feet, where the only voice that matters is your own, and the only thing that counts is whether you can execute the mission. My squadron mates became my family in ways my actual family never had been. We trusted each other with our lives every time we flew. I called home every few weeks, usually getting my mother. She'd fill me in on neighborhood gossip, church events, and my father's latest assignment. Sometimes he'd take the phone for a minute or two. The conversations were transactional. "How's the flying?" he'd ask. "Good," I'd say. "Staying safe?" "Yes, sir." "All right then. Here's your mother." Click, and she'd be back on the line, apologizing in that quiet way of hers that never quite acknowledged what she was apologizing for. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was building my own life, my own reputation, my own command. I told myself I didn't need his approval. Then I made captain at 27, ahead of the standard promotion timeline. It meant more responsibility, more respect for my peers, and a significant step forward in my career. I was leading a flight of 4 aircraft, mentoring younger pilots, and participating in planning sessions that shaped squadron operations. The promotion ceremony was small, just my squadron commander pinning on the new rank, a few words about leadership and service, handshakes all around. That evening, I called home. My mother answered. "That's wonderful, honey," she said. "Let me get your father." I heard muffled voices, the phone changing hands. "Captain, huh?" he said. "That's mid-level at best. Don't get cocky. The real test comes when you're competing for major." And that was it. No congratulations. No acknowledgement that I'd been promoted early, that my performance reports were rated in the top tier, that my squadron commander had specifically mentioned my leadership potential. Just a reminder that I hadn't arrived yet, that I was still climbing, still proving myself. His world revolved entirely around Army culture. When I visited home on leave, his friends, other Army officers mostly, would make jokes about the Air Force. "So you're the one who joined the easy branch," one colonel said, grinning like he'd made the wittiest observation ever. My father laughed along. "She wanted to fly," he said with a shrug, as if that explained some fundamental character flaw. I smiled politely and changed the subject. Later, at dinner, he corrected my terminology. I'd mentioned my service to the country. "It's not the service, Susan. It's a service. There are multiple branches. Accuracy matters in military communication." My mother looked down at her plate. The deeper rift came when I turned down a desk job he tried to arrange through his contacts. A position at the Pentagon, working in joint operations coordination. Safe, prestigious in its own bureaucratic way, and completely removed from flying. "It's a smart career move," he told me over the phone. "Face time with senior leadership. You'd be set up for lieutenant colonel before you know it." I explained that I wanted to stay operational, to keep flying, to lead from the cockpit rather than a desk. There was a long silence. "You just threw away a safe path," he finally said. "You'll regret it when you're still a captain at 35, watching your academy classmates pin on colonel." I thanked him for thinking of me and declined. After that, something changed. When family friends asked about me, he started introducing me differently. Not "my daughter, Captain Chesterfield," but "Susan, she flies, I think." The deliberate vagueness was its own message. He stopped mentioning my career unless directly asked. At a family reunion, an aunt asked about my work. "Oh, she's Air Force," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Different world from what I do." The implication was clear: lesser, softer, not quite real military service. I excused myself to help in the kitchen, where my mother found me 10 minutes later. "He doesn't mean it the way it sounds," she said. But we both knew he did. The invitation to the Fort Eagle reception arrived in March. A joint service event, celebrating a successful multi-branch operation overseas. My father was hosting. His name was listed prominently on the embossed card as the senior Army representative coordinating the event. I almost didn't go. The thought of spending an evening watching him perform for his colleagues while pretending I didn't exist held zero appeal. But my mother called. "It would mean a lot if you came," she said carefully. "These things are important for family unity." Translation: please don't make this harder. I bought a plane ticket. I wore my service dress uniform, Air Force blues, ribbons displayed in perfect alignment above my left pocket. The skirt and service coat were pressed to knife edges. My shoes reflected overhead lights like mirrors. If I was going to attend, I'd do it right. The venue was impressive, a restored officers' club with high ceilings, crown molding, and massive windows overlooking the parade grounds. Army officers filled the room, dress uniforms adorned with combat patches and deployment ribbons. I spotted my father near the bar, surrounded by his peers. He saw me enter but didn't wave. I approached slowly, navigating through clusters of conversation. He was mid-story when I reached his group, something about a training exercise gone wrong. He paused just long enough to acknowledge me. "Susan's here," he said to no one in particular. Then continued his story. One of the officers, a lieutenant colonel with Ranger tabs, gave me a polite nod. "What do you fly, Captain?" he asked during a break in my father's narrative. Before I could answer, my father cut in. "F-16s, out in Nevada. She's doing the standard operational tour." Standard. Routine. Nothing special. The lieutenant colonel looked interested anyway. "Fighters? That's impressive. What squadron?" I started to respond. My father interrupted again. "She's stationed at Nellis. Training rotations mostly." The pattern continued throughout the evening. Every time someone engaged me in conversation, he found a way to minimize it, redirect attention, or simply talk over me. When a major asked about my promotion timeline, my father answered before I could open my mouth. "She made captain recently. We'll see how she does with the increased responsibility." His tone suggested significant doubt. My mother appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine. "You look lovely, dear," she whispered. I thanked her and took a long sip. Around 2100 hours, I excused myself to the restroom. When I returned, I heard my father's voice before I saw him. He was standing with a tight circle of field-grade officers, speaking in that just loud enough to be overheard tone that carries in formal settings. "She's the black sheep," he said. "Joined the wrong branch. Thinks she's somebody." The officers chuckled uncomfortably. One of them glanced around, clearly aware that these comments weren't appropriate. My father didn't notice or didn't care. I mean, good for her, flying around in circles in the desert. But it's nothing serious. Not real deployments. I stood frozen just outside their circle. Every word landed like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. Years of military bearing kicked in automatically, back straight, expression calm, hands relaxed at my sides. I'd learned in pilot training that the worst thing you can do during an emergency is show panic. The same applied here. One of the officers saw me and blanched. My father finally turned, following his colleague's gaze. For half a second, something flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a neutral mask. "Susan," he said evenly, as if he'd been discussing the weather. "Enjoying the reception?" I nodded once. "Very much. Thank you for hosting." My voice came out steady, professional, completely devoid of emotion. I excused myself and walked toward the far side of the room, where a group of younger officers was discussing joint operation protocols. They welcomed me into the conversation without hesitation. A first lieutenant from the Army, fresh-faced and earnest, asked about Air Force close air support procedures. I explained the coordination process, the communication protocols we used, the way we integrated with ground forces. He listened intently, taking mental notes. Then he said something that changed everything. "Hey, aren't you Captain Chesterfield? From that operation in the Gulf?" I blinked. "I've flown several missions in that region." He grinned. "No, I mean the one from last fall. The classified sortie package. My ROTC instructor mentioned your name was on a commendation list. Something about danger close air support under heavy ground fire." I kept my expression carefully neutral. "I can't discuss classified operations, Lieutenant." He nodded quickly. "Right, of course. I wanted to say it's an honor to meet you. What you guys did saved a lot of lives on the ground." After he walked away, I stood very still, processing. A commendation list. Danger close. I'd filed the after-action reports like always, received the routine acknowledgments, and moved on. I hadn't realized the operation had generated formal recognition beyond my chain of command. Certainly my father didn't know. He'd made it clear he considered my work inconsequential. I glanced across the room. He was laughing at something another colonel said, completely at ease in his element. The black sheep. Wrong branch. Nothing serious. The words echoed in my mind. The young lieutenant returned a few minutes later with more information. I probably shouldn't say this, but my instructor mentioned your operation is being reviewed for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Army unit you supported nominated your squadron. Their CO was really impressed. He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. Anyway, I think there's a ceremony next month. Cross-branch awards thing. You'll probably be invited. I thanked him politely and excused myself again. In the parking lot, sitting in my rental car, I let myself feel the full weight of the evening. My father had spent years dismissing my career, minimizing my achievements, treating my service like a phase I'd outgrow. And tonight, in front of his peers, he'd made it explicit. I was an embarrassment. The black sheep. But I'd also just learned that his own Army colleagues, the soldiers I'd supported under fire, valued my work enough to nominate me for one of the highest aviation awards. The disconnect was staggering. I started the engine and drove back to my hotel. The night air was cool through the cracked window. Tomorrow I'd fly back to Nevada, back to my squadron, back to the work that apparently mattered to everyone except my father. The ceremony the lieutenant mentioned, I'd have to check with my commander. If the nomination was real, if the Air Force had accepted it, I'd be expected to attend. And if the Army unit that nominated me was based at Fort Eagle, as I suspected, then there was a good chance my father would be there too. His commanding officer would almost certainly attend. Major General Bennett. I'd never met him, but I knew his reputation. Old school, respected across branches, known for recognizing good work regardless of service affiliation. I thought about that glass shattering on marble. About whispered insults and calculated dismissals. About every time I'd reached for his approval and found only cold assessment. Maybe it was time to stop reaching. Maybe it was time to simply stand, salute, and let my record speak for itself. The ceremony, if I attended, wouldn't be for him. It wouldn't be to prove anything or settle scores. It would be because soldiers on the ground had trusted me with their lives, and I'd delivered. That was the only validation that mattered. The official notification arrived 3 weeks later. A formal letter from Air Combat Command, delivered through my squadron commander. Lieutenant Colonel Harper called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. I'd just finished a training sortie, still wearing my flight suit, when his admin told me he wanted to see me. I walked across the squadron building, running through possible reasons for the summons. Harper was leaning against his desk when I entered, holding a folder. "Close the door, Captain." I did. He gestured to a chair but remained standing himself. "I'm going to cut straight to it. You've been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross." He opened the folder, showing me the official orders. "The citation covers your actions during Operation Granite Shield last September. The Army Infantry Battalion you supported submitted a formal commendation through their chain of command. The Air Force approved it. Congratulations." I sat down slowly, reading the citation. It detailed the mission in clinical military language, enemy contact, danger close strikes, multiple passes under heavy anti-aircraft fire, casualties prevented through precision engagement. Reading it felt surreal, like looking at someone else's mission. I remembered that day clearly, the radio calls from the ground controller, desperation creeping into his voice, the way my wingman and I had rolled in hot despite the tracers arcing up toward us. The controlled aggression required to put ordnance exactly where it needed to be without hitting friendly forces. It had been intense. But it had also been the job. What we trained for. "There's a ceremony at Fort Eagle in 4 weeks, Harper continued. "Joint service event. The Army Battalion Commander will be there, along with several general officers from both branches. You're expected to attend. I'm recommending you for promotion to Major, by the way. This helps your package considerably." He smiled. "Hell of a job, Susan." I thanked him, my mind already racing ahead. Fort Eagle. My father's base. His commanding officer would definitely attend. This was exactly the kind of event where senior Army leadership made appearances. And my father would be there, in the audience or somewhere in the crowd, watching his daughter receive an award he didn't know existed. I walked back to my quarters in a daze. The small room I rented off base was functional: bed, desk, kitchenette, nothing fancy. I hung my flight suit in the closet and changed into civilian clothes. Then I sat at the desk and stared at the official orders. Distinguished Flying Cross. Third highest aviation award in the Air Force, typically reserved for heroism or extraordinary achievement in aerial flight. I thought about calling my mother, then decided against it. If I told her, she'd tell my father. This news needed to come differently. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work. Flight schedules, training objectives, mentoring newer pilots, anything to keep my mind occupied. But in quiet moments, usually late at night, I'd think about the ceremony. About standing on stage while my father watched. Part of me wanted him to feel what I'd felt at that reception: small, dismissed, inadequate. Part of me wanted him to realize he'd been wrong about me all along. And part of me, the part one tried to ignore, just wanted him to be proud. That last part was the most dangerous. I called my mother 2 weeks before the ceremony. We talked about nothing important for a while: her garden, the new neighbors, a recipe she'd tried. Then I mentioned, casually, that I'd be attending a ceremony at Fort Eagle. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said. "Will you have time to visit while you're in town?" I told her I wasn't sure, that the schedule was tight. "Well, maybe we'll see you there," she said. "Your father got an invitation to some kind of awards thing." "I think it's the same day." My chest tightened. "Probably," I said. We changed subjects. The night before the ceremony, alone in my quarters, I laid out my service dress uniform. I'd sent it to the professional cleaners, had the ribbons updated to reflect my current awards, polished my shoes until they reflected like dark mirrors. Every detail had to be perfect. Not for my father, I kept telling myself that, but for the soldiers who'd trusted me that day. For my squadron. For the Air Force. I tried on the uniform, checking every alignment, every measurement. The fit was exact. The appearance was flawless. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw Captain Susan Chesterfield, Air Force pilot, recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross. But I also saw the 8-year-old girl who'd practiced saluting in front of the same mirror, trying to get the angle just right. The teenager who'd memorized military regulations to impress her father at dinner. The young woman who'd mailed a photo of her commissioning and received a form letter in response. All those versions of me were still there, layered beneath the uniform, hoping for something I couldn't quite name. I took off the uniform carefully and hung it up. Tomorrow would come whether I was ready or not. Sleep didn't come easy. I ran through scenarios in my mind: what I'd say if he approached me, how I'd react if he ignored me, what expression I'd maintain if he made another dismissive comment. I rehearsed neutrality. Composure. The kind of bearing that gave nothing away. By 0300 hours, I gave up on sleep and went for a run. The Nevada desert was cold before dawn, the air sharp and clean. My breath fogged in the darkness. I ran until my legs burned and my mind quieted, until the only thing that mattered was the next mile. I flew commercial to Fort Eagle the next afternoon. The plane was packed with soldiers and families, everyone in various stages of dress. I wore civilian clothes, jeans, a simple shirt, and kept to myself. At the airport, I rented a car and drove to the base. The ceremony wasn't until 1900 hours. I had time. I checked into a hotel off-post, showered, and began the methodical process of getting ready. Uniform on, piece by piece. Hair pinned back in regulation standards. Minimal makeup. Ribbons aligned. Shoes checked one final time. At 1800 hours, I drove onto the post. The ceremony was being held in the main conference center, a large modern building near the headquarters complex. I parked and sat in the car for a moment, breathing slowly. This wasn't about him, I reminded myself. This was about service. About doing the job well. About the soldiers on the ground who'd gone home to their families because my wingman and I had put steel on target when it mattered most. That was the story. That was what counted. I got out of the car and walked toward the building. The conference center lobby was already filling with people. I showed my invitation to the staff sergeant managing the door. He checked my name against his list and nodded. Captain Chesterfield. You're seated in the second row, ma'am. Front section, reserved for award recipients. I thanked him and moved inside. The main hall was impressive, high ceilings, professional lighting, rows of chairs facing a stage with flags from all service branches displayed behind the podium. Early arrivals were finding their seats, greeting each other, settling in. And then I saw him. My father stood near the third row, wearing his Army service uniform. Full colonel insignia, a chest full of ribbons, spit-shined shoes. He was talking to another officer, gesturing as he made some point. He looked exactly like he always did, confident, authoritative, completely in his element. My mother stood beside him, quieter, hands clasped in front of her. She saw me first. Her eyes widened slightly. She touched my father's arm. He turned. Our eyes met across the room. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I walked toward them. Mom. Dad. I kept my voice neutral. My mother hugged me quickly. My father extended his hand. We shook formally, like colleagues. What are you doing here? He asked. The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely confused. I held up my invitation. I was invited. He took it, read it, and his expression shifted. You're receiving an award? It wasn't congratulatory. It was surprised, maybe even skeptical. Yes, sir, I said. He handed the invitation back. Huh, was all he said. Then someone called his name, and he turned away to greet another colonel. My mother squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I thanked her and excused myself to find my seat. The second row felt both prominent and exposed. I sat down carefully, smoothing my skirt, placing my cover on my lap. Other award recipients filtered in: a Navy lieutenant commander, 2 Army captains, a Marine major. We exchanged polite nods, but didn't talk much. Behind me, the audience continued filling in. I heard my father's voice occasionally, holding court with his peers. He was in his element, networking, being seen. I kept my eyes forward and practiced the breathing techniques I used before difficult sorties. Slow inhale. Controlled exhale. Focus on the mission. At 18:55 hours, a master sergeant called the room to attention. Everyone rose as the official party entered: the base commander, several general officers, the ceremony coordinator. They took their positions on stage. We were released to sit. The base commander, a 2-star general, welcomed everyone and explained the significance of joint service recognition. His remarks were professional and brief. Then he began calling recipients forward, one at a time, reading citations and presenting awards. The Navy lieutenant commander went first. Her citation described actions during a humanitarian mission. Applause followed her back to her seat. The Army captains went next, receiving Bronze Stars for actions during a deployment. More applause. The Marine major received a Joint Service Commendation. Each presentation took about 5 minutes. I counted down, controlling my breathing, maintaining composure. Finally, the general called my name. Captain Susan Chesterfield, United States Air Force, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in aerial flight. I stood and walked to the stage, each step measured and precise. My shoes clicked on the polished floor. I climbed the stairs and came to attention before the general. He smiled slightly and shook my hand before beginning the citation. The room was completely silent. On the afternoon of September 22nd, he read the entire citation, every detail of that mission. The endangered infantry platoon. The multiple passes under fire. The precision required. The casualties prevented. His voice carried weight, making the words mean something beyond the military jargon. When he finished, he held up the medal, a bronze cross hanging from a striped ribbon. It is my distinct honor to present you with the Distinguished Flying Cross. He pinned it to my uniform, just above my other ribbons. We exchanged salutes. The room erupted in applause. I turned to face the audience, standing at attention, letting the moment exist without commentary or reaction. In the third row, my mother was clapping, tears streaming down her face. My father sat beside her, hands in his lap, face unreadable. I held his gaze for 1 second, then turned and walked back to my seat. The ceremony continued with 2 more recipients, but I barely registered them. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through me like after a combat sortie. When the official presentations concluded, the ceremony coordinator invited everyone to a reception in the adjacent hall. We stood as the official party exited, then followed them into the reception area. The space was set up with round tables, a bar, and stations of hors d'oeuvres. Officers from all branches mingled, the atmosphere loosening into something more social. I made my way toward the bar, needing water, needing a moment to decompress. Before I reached it, someone called my name. I turned. The young Army lieutenant from the reception months earlier, the one who'd first told me about the commendation, stood there grinning. "I told you," he said. "Distinguished Flying Cross." "That was incredible, ma'am." I thanked him. He introduced me to several of his colleagues, all junior officers who'd heard about the operation. They asked questions, tactical ones, about how we'd coordinated with the ground controller, about the weapon systems we'd employed. I answered carefully, staying within the bounds of what could be discussed in an unclassified setting. Then a voice cut through our conversation. "Captain Chesterfield?" I turned. My father stood there with 3 other colonels, all Army, all looking vaguely interested. "Yes, sir," I said. He gestured to his companions. "These are colleagues from the operations group. They wanted to meet you." It wasn't a warm introduction, just a statement of fact. One of the colonels extended his hand. "Hell of a citation, Captain. The ground commander from that operation is a friend of mine. He says you and your wingman saved his platoon." I shook his hand. "We did our job, sir." "The ground controller did his job." "Everyone did their job." Another colonel nodded approvingly. "That's the right answer, but don't undersell it. Danger close in contested airspace takes guts." They asked more questions. I answered, aware that my father was listening to every word. His expression remained neutral, but I could see him processing, recalculating. This wasn't the narrative he'd constructed, the black sheep playing at military service. This was his daughter receiving recognition from Army officers, the same branch he'd spent 30 years serving. When the colonels finally moved on, my father remained. We stood there in the middle of the reception, surrounded by conversation and laughter, facing each other in our respective uniforms. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You never mentioned that operation." I met his eyes. "You never asked about my operations." He flinched slightly, almost imperceptibly. I didn't realize he stopped, seeming to search for words. I waited. "I didn't realize the scope of what you were doing." "I fly combat missions," I said quietly. "Same as I have for 3 years. Same as I'll continue doing until the Air Force tells me otherwise." He nodded slowly. "Your mother's been telling me I was wrong about you." I didn't respond. He cleared his throat. "She was right. I was wrong." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement. I accepted it with a slight nod. "Thank you, sir." The awkward moment was interrupted by a ripple of attention moving through the room. People were straightening, turning toward the entrance. I followed their gazes and saw why. A 3-star general had entered, Major General Bennett, my father's commanding officer. Tall, distinguished, wearing service dress with 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders. He moved through the room with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to command, pausing to greet people, shaking hands. My father immediately shifted into professional mode. "That's General Bennett," he said unnecessarily. "My CO." But Bennett had already spotted us. More specifically, he'd spotted me. The general changed direction, heading straight toward where my father and I stood. Every conversation in our immediate vicinity died. People stepped back slightly, creating space. My father straightened further, if that was possible. Bennett reached us and, before acknowledging my father at all, came directly to me. He stopped, looked me in the eye, and rendered a crisp, regulation salute. Completely proper, completely unexpected. I returned the salute immediately, confusion and shock warring in my mind. Then he extended his hand. "Captain Chesterfield. It is an honor to finally meet your daughter, Colonel." The crystal tumbler slipped from my father's hand. It seemed to fall in slow motion, ice cubes catching the light, amber liquid arcing outward. When the glass hit the marble floor, it shattered with a sound that cut through every conversation in the room. Silence spread outward from the epicenter of broken crystal and expensive bourbon. Every head turned. Every eye tracked from the shattered glass up to my father's face, then to General Bennett, then to me. I maintained my composure through sheer muscle memory. Years of flight training had prepared me for moments when everything goes wrong: engine failure, electrical fire, hostile missile launch, and the only thing that saves you is the discipline to keep executing procedures when your brain wants to panic. This was that kind of moment. I kept my hand extended, meeting General Bennett's handshake with appropriate firmness. "It's an honor, sir," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. Bennett seemed oblivious to the spectacle my father was creating. Or perhaps he'd seen too many officers crack under unexpected circumstances to find it noteworthy. "I've been following your career," he told me, releasing my hand but maintaining eye contact. "Your squadron commander speaks very highly of you. And that citation we just heard, exemplary work under pressure." He finally acknowledged my father, who stood frozen beside me. "You must be very proud, Robert." My father's face had gone through several shades of red and now settled on something approaching normal color, though his expression remained stunned. Yes, sir. Of course, sir." His voice came out rougher than usual. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't aware you knew Susan." Bennett raised an eyebrow. "I make it my business to know outstanding officers in theater, regardless of branch. Last fall, after Operation Granite Shield, the battalion commander couldn't stop talking about the Air Force assets that saved his people. When I learned Captain Chesterfield was your daughter, I asked for her performance reports." Impressive trajectory. Someone from the catering staff appeared with a dustpan and cloth, quietly cleaning up the broken glass. The conversations around us resumed, but I could feel the attention still focused our way. This was the kind of moment that would circulate through the officer corps, Colonel Chesterfield's daughter receiving public recognition from his commanding general while he stood there like a junior lieutenant caught off guard. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication. Only a strange numbness, like watching events happen to someone else. Bennett continued speaking, now addressing both of us. "The joint service coordination on that operation was textbook. We've actually been using it as a case study in some of our leadership courses, how effective cross-branch communication can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." He turned back to me. "I understand you're up for promotion to major?" I nodded. "The board meets next quarter, sir." He smiled. "You'll make it. And when you do, consider applying for joint staff positions. We need more officers who can bridge the service gaps." My father found his voice again. "Susan's very dedicated to flying, sir. She's turned down staff positions before." There was something in his tone, not quite criticism, but not quite pride either. Bennett looked between us, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. He'd been a commander long enough to read family dynamics, even in formal settings. "Flying's important," he said carefully. "But so is strategic thinking. Captain Chesterfield has demonstrated both." He checked his watch. "I need to make the rounds." "Captain, congratulations again." "Colonel, I'll see you at the operations briefing Monday." He moved on, leaving us standing in the wake of his attention. The silence between my father and me stretched out, heavy with 30 years of complicated history. People were watching us, I could feel it, even as they pretended to focus on their own conversations. My mother appeared from somewhere, moving to my father's side. She looked at me with an expression that mixed pride, concern, and something like relief. "That was remarkable, sweetheart," she said quietly. My father still hadn't moved. He stared at the spot where Bennett had stood, processing. Finally, he looked at me. "How long has he known about you?" The question was complex, not just asking about Bennett's awareness, but digging at something deeper. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never met him before tonight." My father nodded slowly. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical stature. "I didn't know," he said. "About the operation. About Bennett's interest in your career. About—" He stopped, jaw working. My mother touched his arm. "Robert," she said gently. He shook his head. "I need air." He walked away, not toward the exit, but toward the terrace doors at the far end of the reception hall. My mother started to follow, then paused. "Give him a minute," she said to me. This is hard for him. I wanted to say that it had been hard for me for years. That I'd spent my entire life trying to earn respect he'd never offered. That I'd listened to him tell his friends I was nothing serious, nothing important, while I'd been pulling triggers in combat and keeping soldiers alive. But my mother already knew all of that. She'd watched it happen. I know, Mom, I said instead. She squeezed my hand and followed my father to the terrace. I stood alone in my dress blues, the distinguished flying cross heavy on my chest, surrounded by celebrating officers who suddenly seemed very interested in introducing themselves. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I shook hands, accepted congratulations, and answered questions about my squadron and training pipeline. Several officers mentioned they had daughters or nieces considering military service, asking if I'd be willing to speak with them. I handed out contact information, maintaining the professional courtesy expected of a field-grade officer even though my mind was elsewhere. Around 2100 hours, people began filtering out. I looked for my parents, but didn't see them. Eventually, I said my goodbyes and walked to the parking lot. My father stood beside my rental car. Alone. He'd removed his service coat despite the cool evening air, standing in just his shirt and tie. When he saw me approaching, he straightened slightly, some ingrained military bearing asserting itself even in private moments. I stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then he said, I've been proud of a lot of things in my career. I thought I knew what accomplishment looked like. He paused. Tonight I realized I've been proud of the wrong things. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to make this easy for him, to offer forgiveness and move on. But another part, the part that had spent years swallowing dismissals and minimizations, needed him to actually say it. What does accomplishment look like? I asked. He exhaled slowly. What you did. Not just the mission, though that's remarkable. But showing up tonight, wearing that uniform with honor, letting your record speak for itself. You didn't need me to validate it. That's real strength. I learned from you, I said quietly. Not the validation part. The service part. You taught me that the mission matters more than ego. That you do the job right whether anyone notices or not. I just applied it differently than you expected. He nodded, blinking rapidly. I was wrong about the Air Force. I was wrong about your choices. And his voice cracked slightly. I was wrong about you. It wasn't a complete apology. There were years of damage that couldn't be repaired with one conversation. But it was a start. Thank you, I said. He pulled keys from his pocket, then hesitated. Your mother wants you to come to dinner tomorrow. Before you fly back. It was offered tentatively, like he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. I considered declining. Part of me wanted to fly back tonight, to put distance between myself and this complicated emotional landscape. But I thought about my mother, who'd supported me quietly all these years, who'd never gotten to openly celebrate my achievements. I can do dinner, I said. He nodded, relief visible in the relaxing of his shoulders. Good. That's good. He walked toward his own car, then stopped and turned back. Susan. I looked at him. I am proud of you. I should have said it years ago. I watched him drive away, then sat in my rental car for a long time, not starting the engine, just breathing. The distinguished flying cross caught the parking lot lights, bronze glinting against my blue uniform. I thought about that 8-year-old girl practicing salutes, the teenager memorizing regulations, the young lieutenant mailing photos that went unacknowledged. All of them had wanted this moment, the recognition, the validation, the proof that she'd measured up. But sitting there, I realized something surprising. It didn't feel like I'd imagined. It didn't feel like victory or vindication. It felt like closure. The weeks after Fort Eagle blurred together in the rhythm of squadron operations. Morning briefings at 0600 hours, flight schedules that shifted daily based on aircraft availability and training requirements, debriefs that ran long into the afternoon. I threw myself into the work with renewed focus, finding clarity in the simple demands of flying high-performance aircraft. In the cockpit, hierarchy was clean. Physics didn't care about family drama. Gravity and thrust, lift and drag, these forces operated according to immutable laws, and mastering them required presence, not introspection. The story of the ceremony spread anyway. Not through official channels, but through the informal network that connects military bases like neural pathways. Someone from Fort Eagle knew someone at Nellis, who mentioned the incident to someone in my squadron. Within days, half my unit had heard some version of the tale, most of them exaggerated, some barely resembling what actually happened. I didn't correct them. Let them have their stories. The truth was complicated enough without public dissection. Lieutenant Colonel Harper called me into his office 2 weeks after the ceremony. "Sit down, Susan," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He had a folder open in front of him, my personnel file. I recognized it by the thickness. "I've had 3 inquiries this week about your availability for joint staff positions. 2 from Nellis Command, 1 from the Pentagon." He looked at me over his reading glasses. General Bennett's recommendation carries weight. People are paying attention. I shifted in my chair. "I'm not interested in leaving the squadron, sir." Harper leaned back, studying me. "I know. You've made that clear before. But consider this. You can serve the Air Force from a cockpit, or you can serve it from a position where you shape policy and operations for the entire force. Both matter. Both require sacrifice." He closed the folder. "I'm not pushing you either way. I'm just saying that at some point, continuing to fly means accepting you won't influence the bigger picture. You've got the talent for both. Think about which one you want in 10 years. The question haunted me during a night sortie 2 days later. I was at 25,000 feet, running an intercept exercise against a Navy F/A-18 when Harper's words came back. The sky at altitude is a different kind of silence. Engine noise fades into background hum, radio calls punctuate emptiness, and there's space to think in a way ground life doesn't permit. I'd always believed flying was enough. That executing the mission well, bringing jets and pilots home safely, teaching younger aviators, that this was sufficient contribution. But Bennett's comments about strategic thinking, about bridging service gaps, suggested a different path. I broke off the intercept and headed back to base, the question unresolved. Some decisions don't have clear answers. Sometimes you just fly the jet and deal with the consequences later. I landed as the sun touched the western horizon, the desert turning gold and purple in the fading light. After parking and completing post-flight checks, I walked across the ramp toward the squadron building. My phone buzzed in my flight suit pocket. I pulled it out. A text from my mother. "Dinner Sunday? Your father has something he wants to discuss." I stared at the message, then typed a brief reply, "I'll be there." Sunday arrived with clear skies and light winds. I drove to my parents' house mid-morning, the route familiar from childhood. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same wide streets, same mature trees, same sense of military order in the perfectly maintained lawns. My father's car sat in the driveway, washed and waxed to showroom condition. I parked behind it and sat for a moment, preparing myself. Whatever he wanted to discuss could go in any direction. With my father, you never knew if you were walking into a minefield or an olive branch. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She hugged me tightly, then held me at arm's length, examining me like she used to when I came home from school. "You look tired," she said. I smiled. "Flight schedule's been busy." She led me inside. The house smelled like roasting chicken and fresh bread. My father stood in the living room, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, about as casual as he ever got. "Susan," he said, nodding. "Dad," I replied. My mother ushered us toward the dining room. "Let's eat first. We can talk after." Dinner was careful conversation about neutral topics. My mother asked about my squadron, and I gave her the unclassified version: new pilots arriving, training exercises, the weather in Nevada. My father asked about my aircraft, technical questions about systems and capabilities. I answered what I could without getting into restricted information. He listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking follow-up questions that revealed he'd been reading about modern fighter operations. It was surreal, this new dynamic where he actually seemed curious about my work rather than dismissive of it. After dinner, my mother cleared dishes and brought coffee. We moved to the living room. My father settled into his usual chair, the one position to command the room. "Old habits. I've been doing some thinking," he said without preamble, "about how I handled your career. About the things I said. He paused, choosing words carefully. I realized I was trying to shape you into something I understood, instead of accepting what you already were. I sipped my coffee, waiting. He continued. Your mother pointed out that I spent years criticizing your choices while you were actually doing the work, flying combat missions, earning respect, making rank. She's right. I was so focused on what I thought military service should look like that I missed what it actually looked like in you. It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard him say. I appreciate that, I said quietly. He leaned forward. I can't undo the past. The things I said at the reception, the way I dismissed your achievements, that's on my record now. But I want to do better going forward. He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. I've been reassigned. Not punishment, he added quickly. Voluntary transfer. I'll be working at the Joint Operations Center in Stuttgart. It's a NATO position, coordinating between member nations' militaries. I processed this. Stuttgart meant Germany, meant distance, meant a very different kind of work than he'd done for 30 years. That's a big change, I said carefully. He nodded. It is. But I think I need it. Too many years in the same lane, thinking there's only one way to serve. Maybe working with other countries, other military cultures, will teach me what I should have learned watching you. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement. Progress. When do you leave? I asked. 6 weeks, my mother said. We'll be there for 2 years at least. The conversation moved to logistics, housing in Germany, what they'd do with the house here, whether my mother's German would survive after 30 years of disuse. Underneath the practical discussion ran an emotional current none of us addressed directly. My father was removing himself from the environment where he'd built his entire identity. Starting over, in a sense. Whether he'd learn what he claimed to want to learn remained to be seen. But the attempt itself represented change. After 2 hours, I stood to leave. My father walked me to the door. Come visit us in Stuttgart, he said. When you can get leave. I nodded. I'll try. Driving back to base, I thought about family and the strange paths reconciliation takes. We weren't fixed. Years of damage don't evaporate because someone acknowledges their mistakes. But we'd opened a door that had been closed for a long time. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe that was all anyone could reasonably expect. The desert highway stretched ahead, empty and straight, and I focused on the simple task of driving, letting the complicated emotions settle into something manageable. Back at Nellis, I requested a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Harper. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him. About staff positions and strategic influence. He waited, patient as always. I'm not ready to leave the cockpit yet. But maybe in a few years, after I make major, I could consider a joint staff assignment. Something that keeps me connected to operational units, but gives me broader perspective. Harper smiled. That's mature thinking. We'll plan accordingly. He paused. For what it's worth, you're going to make an excellent field-grade officer. You've got the judgment for it. The promotion board met 6 weeks later. Results came through official channels, a congratulatory letter from Air Force Personnel Command, new rank insignia delivered to my commander for presentation. Lieutenant Colonel Harper called me into his office. Congratulations, Major Select Chesterfield, he said, grinning. The board loved your package. You were definitely promoted. Pinning ceremony is your choice. We can do it here with the squadron or wait until family can attend. I thought about my parents in Germany, settling into their new assignment. Squadron ceremony works, I said. Family's overseas anyway. We scheduled it for a Friday afternoon. My squadron mates filled the briefing room, along with some pilots from other units I'd flown with. The ceremony was simple, citation read, new rank pinned on, handshakes all around. Afterward, we gathered at the officers' club for the traditional promotion party. The mood was celebratory, relaxed in a way formal ceremonies never are. People told embarrassing stories about me from training exercises. I returned the favor. It felt right, being promoted among peers who'd seen me work and knew what the rank meant in concrete terms. That evening, alone in my quarters, I called my parents. My mother answered. How's Germany? I asked. Beautiful, she said. Cold, but beautiful. Your father's adjusting. The NATO work is challenging him in good ways. I told her about the promotion. She congratulated me warmly, then called my father to the phone. "Major Chesterfield," he said when he picked up. "That has a good sound to it." His voice carried genuine warmth. "Thank you," I said. We talked briefly about his new job, the officers he was working with, the learning curve. Then he said something unexpected. "I've been telling people here about you. About what you do. One of the German generals has a daughter considering military service. I gave him your email, if that's all right. He wants to ask you about being a female pilot in combat operations." I smiled. "That's fine, Dad. Tell him to reach out anytime." We said goodbye and hung up. I sat there in the quiet, holding the phone, feeling the weight of new rank insignia in my other hand. Change happens slowly in families, like erosion shaping stone. Invisible in the moment, undeniable over time. My father was learning to see me differently. I was learning to not need him to. Both processes mattered. Both took work. The next year passed in the rhythm of major-level responsibilities. I took command of a flight within the squadron, 4 aircraft, 12 pilots, all the administrative and operational complexity that came with it. The work was demanding. Flight leads need to think tactically and strategically simultaneously, managing individual sorties while understanding how they fit into broader mission objectives. I thrived on it. The additional responsibility, the trust placed in me, the opportunity to mentor junior captains the way I wish someone had mentored me, all of it fed something I hadn't known I was missing. My father and I spoke monthly, brief calls that covered work and life without diving too deep. He sent photos from Germany, medieval architecture, the NATO headquarters, my parents at various European cities on weekends. I sent photos of jets, desert sunsets, the squadron during particularly successful exercises. We were building something new, brick by careful brick. Not the relationship I'd wanted as a child, but something more honest. 2 military professionals respecting each other's service. It was enough. More than enough. Then, 18 months after Fort Eagle, I received notification of a new assignment. I'd been selected for Air Command and Staff College, the professional military education required for field-grade officers. 1 year in Montgomery, Alabama, studying strategy, leadership, and joint operations. It was exactly the kind of strategic education Harper had mentioned, preparation for higher command, for positions that shaped policy rather than just executing it. The assignment came with a follow-on. After completing ACSC, I'd report to the Joint Staff at the Pentagon. 2 years working in multi-service strategic planning. I called my father from my quarters after receiving the notification. "Congratulations," he said when I told him. "That's a significant vote of confidence. They're grooming you for command." We talked about the assignment, what it would mean for my flying career, a pause, but not necessarily an end, what opportunities it might create. Then he said, "You know, I spent 30 years thinking I understood what service meant. Turns out I was only seeing a narrow slice. You're going to see the bigger picture now. Learn from it. Use it." His voice carried weight, like he was passing something down. "I will," I promised. I grew up watching my father salute. Colonel Robert Chesterfield never did anything halfway, especially when it came to his Army career. By the time I was 8, I could recite the chain of command better than most privates. In our house, respect wasn't given freely. It was earned through rank, discipline, and unwavering conformity to military standards. My mother existed in the spaces between his expectations, quietly encouraging me when he wasn't looking. I announced my intention to join the Air Force during my junior year of college. He set down his fork with deliberate precision. The Air Force. The way he emphasized it made it sound like I'd said I was joining the circus. "You'll never last flight school. It's not about wanting it, it's about having what it takes." I graduated with honors and proved him wrong at every turn. Officer training school, undergraduate pilot training, my silver wings, I earned them all. The day I received my wings, standing on that stage in my service dress uniform, I scanned the audience for my father's face. He wasn't there. My mother attended alone, explaining later that Dad had paperwork that couldn't wait. I mailed him a picture anyway. The response came 2 weeks later, a form letter with a handwritten line at the bottom. "Congratulations on your commission. Dad." Not love, Dad. Not proud of you. Just his title. My first operational assignment took me to Nellis Air Force Base flying F-16s. The desert heat was relentless, but I loved the work. My squadron mates became my family. I called home every few weeks, usually getting my mother. Sometimes he'd take the phone for a minute or two. The conversations were transactional. How's the flying? Good. Staying safe? Yes, sir. All right then. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't need his approval. When I made captain at 27, ahead of schedule, I called home. My mother was thrilled. My father's response was different. That's mid-level at best. Don't get cocky. The real test comes when you're competing for major. No congratulations. No acknowledgement that I'd been promoted early. Just a reminder that I hadn't arrived yet. His world revolved entirely around Army culture. When I visited home, his friends made jokes about the Air Force being the easy branch. My father laughed along. The deeper rift came when I turned down a desk job he tried to arrange through his contacts at the Pentagon. It's a smart career move, he told me. You'd be set up for lieutenant colonel before you know it. I explained that I wanted to stay operational, to keep flying. There was a long silence. You just threw away a safe path. You'll regret it when you're still a captain at 35. After that, something changed. He started introducing me as Susan. She flies, I think, deliberately vague, the implication clear, lesser, not quite real military service. The invitation to the Fort Eagle reception arrived in March. A joint service event my father was hosting. I almost didn't go, but my mother called. It would mean a lot if you came. I wore my service dress uniform, Air Force blues, ribbons displayed in perfect alignment. Throughout the evening, every time someone engaged me in conversation, he found a way to minimize it or redirect attention. Around 2100 hours, I heard his voice before I saw him. He was standing with a circle of field-grade officers. She's the black sheep, he said. Joined the wrong branch. Thinks she's somebody. Flying around in circles in the desert. Nothing serious. Every word landed like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. Years of military bearing kicked in automatically. One of the officers saw me and blanched. My father finally turned. For half a second, something flickered across his face. Then it was gone. I excused myself and walked away, smiling through clenched teeth. Later, a young Army lieutenant approached me. Hey, aren't you Captain Chesterfield? From that operation in the Gulf. He mentioned my name was on a classified commendation list. Something about danger close air support under heavy ground fire. What you guys did saved a lot of lives on the ground. I stood very still, processing. A commendation list. The Army unit I'd supported had nominated my squadron for the Distinguished Flying Cross. There was a ceremony next month. Cross Branch Awards. My father would probably be there. His commanding officer, Major General Bennett, would almost certainly attend. The official notification arrived 3 weeks later. Distinguished Flying Cross for actions during Operation Granite Shield. The ceremony at Fort Eagle. For weeks away. I thought about that glass shattering on marble, about whispered insults and calculated dismissals. Maybe it was time to stop reaching for his approval. The ceremony wouldn't be for him. It would be because soldiers on the ground had trusted me with their lives, and I'd delivered. The day of the ceremony arrived. The conference center was filling with people when I entered. Then I saw him, my father in full Army dress uniform, standing near the third row with my mother. She saw me first, her eyes widening. She touched his arm. He turned. Our eyes met across the room. I approached. What are you doing here? He asked, genuinely confused. I held up my invitation. I was invited. He took it, read it, and his expression shifted. You're receiving an award? It wasn't congratulatory. It was surprised. Yes, sir. The ceremony began. When the general called my name and read the citation, the endangered infantry platoon, the multiple passes under fire, the precision required, the casualties prevented, the room was completely silent. He pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to my uniform. The room erupted in applause. In the third row, my mother was clapping, tears streaming. My father sat beside her, hands in his lap, face unreadable. At the reception afterward, my father approached with 3 other colonels. One extended his hand. "Hell of a citation, Captain. The ground commander from that operation is a friend of mine. He says you and your wingman saved his platoon." They asked questions. My father listened to every word, watching his daughter receive recognition from Army officers, the same branch he'd spent 30 years serving. Then the room shifted. Major General Bennett had entered, my father's commanding officer. 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders. He moved through the room, then changed direction, heading straight toward us. Before acknowledging my father at all, he came directly to me. He stopped and rendered a crisp salute. I returned it immediately, shocked. Then he extended his hand. "Captain Chesterfield, it is an honor to finally meet your daughter, Colonel." The crystal tumbler slipped from my father's hand. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound that cut through every conversation. Silence spread outward. Every head turned. I maintained my composure through sheer muscle memory and shook General Bennett's hand. "It's an honor, sir." Bennett seemed oblivious to the spectacle. "I've been following your career. Your squadron commander speaks very highly of you." He finally acknowledged my father. "You must be very proud, Robert." My father's face had gone through several shades of red. Yes, sir. Of course, sir." His voice came out rough. Bennett continued, "I make it my business to know outstanding officers in theater, regardless of branch. When I learned Captain Chesterfield was your daughter, I asked for her performance reports." Impressive trajectory. After Bennett moved on, my father and I stood in heavy silence. People were watching. Finally, he looked at me. "How long has he known about you?" The question dug at something deeper than surface curiosity. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never met him before tonight." The years that followed brought change. My father's reassignment to NATO in Stuttgart. His heart attack and slow recovery. Our conversations shifting from transactional to genuine. Air Command and Staff College, where I learned strategic thinking alongside officers from all services. The Pentagon, where I coordinated operations across combatant commands. My promotion to lieutenant colonel and command of an F-16 squadron at Luke Air Force Base. My father visited once during my command tour. Over dinner, he said, "You're doing this better than I ever did." I commanded with authority. You command with authority and empathy. That's more effective. I pushed back slightly. You taught me the authority part. I learned the empathy part from watching what happened when it was missing. He nodded slowly. Another lesson learned late. I'm glad you learned it earlier. When I made full colonel at 36, he called that evening. "Colonel Chesterfield," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Welcome to the club." We'd built something new over the years, not the relationship I'd wanted as a child, but something more honest. 2 military professionals respecting each other's service. His second heart attack came without warning. Massive, unsurvivable. My mother called at 0200 hours. "He's gone, Susan." The funeral was held with full military honors. Watching them fold the flag and present it to my mother, I felt the weight of complicated grief, mourning the father he'd been, the father he'd tried to become, and the father we'd never quite achieved despite our best efforts. Work provided structure through grief. I was promoted to Deputy Director of Strategic Planning at the Pentagon, then accepted a special assignment as Commandant of Cadets at the Air Force Academy. Working with 4,000 future officers rekindled my connection to purpose. During my second year there, I received notification of my promotion to Brigadier General. The promotion ceremony was held at the Academy with full military pageantry. Major General Harper pinned on my star. Standing on that stage, wearing the single star that represented 22 years of service, I thought about my father. About that dinner table conversation when he dismissed my Air Force dreams. About years of minimization. About that moment at Fort Eagle when everything changed. About his slow recognition of his failures and late in life attempts to repair our relationship. He never saw me make general. Never got to render that salute to his daughter, the general officer. Part of me wished he had. Part of me had stopped needing it. The journey from needing his approval to not needing it, while still valuing the relationship we'd managed to build, had been long and painful. But it had made me stronger. It had taught me that self-worth comes from within, that validation from others is pleasant but not essential. After the ceremony, I stood alone on the academy terrace overlooking the mountains. Colorado in spring is spectacular: snow-capped peaks, clear air, endless sky. I'd built something meaningful. Not despite my father's early dismissal, but informed by it. His inability to see my worth had forced me to define it myself. That was his final gift, unintended but powerful nonetheless. My mother joined me on the terrace. "You did it," she said quietly. "You became exactly who you were meant to be." I thought about that. I'm still becoming. This isn't the end. It's just another beginning. She smiled. "That's exactly what your father would say." And in that moment, I heard his voice, not dismissive or critical, but acknowledging. The story doesn't end here. Careers continue, new challenges emerge, relationships evolve. But standing on that terrace as a new brigadier general, I recognized completion of a particular arc. From daughter seeking approval to officer earning respect to leader defining success on her own terms. The journey had been difficult. The cost had been high. But the destination, becoming someone I respected, regardless of external validation, made everything worthwhile. Justice, I'd learned long ago, doesn't come with vengeance. It comes with composure. And composure, finally and irrevocably, was mine. Thanks for watching. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder: respect is earned, not begged for. Drop your story below. I read every comment. Questions for you. Have you ever been dismissed by a parent or a mentor, then proved them wrong? What boundary did you set that finally changed the relationship? If you've served, did cross-branch bias ever show up for you? Would public recognition change anything, or is private integrity enough? What would you say to the version of you who is still chasing approval? If you were in my father's shoes, what would you have done differently? Turn on notifications for the next chapter. More true stories on courage, boundaries, and quiet wins.